Oh, that's quite a good question, actually. Who's in charge of the national story? It's a bit lazy, but it's not without merits to bookmakers to talk about politics. I don't think we've ever done it, but it's you can see why people do. Here's a bookmaker to talk about how the markets are moving. If you were a Tory shill or a sort of Nigel Farage toe tickler, you probably wouldn't be talking to any bookmakers today, even if you did it on a regular basis when the news suited your political agenda, because something extraordinary happened in the markets yesterday. For the first time in a long time, the Labour Party, the Labour government, moved ahead. The margins are small, but they are now the favourites, with Ladbrokes and others, to win the most seats at the next general election. I just want to let that percolate for a moment, and I'd like you to wonder why you didn't know that already. Don't text me to tell me that you did, all right? There's only room for one massive show-off on this programme, and I've already started. Why do you think you didn't know that? I mean, it's not even a rhetorical question. Why do you think you didn't know that yesterday the Labour Party, which could not really have had a worse start to 2026, moved into the favourites position in most betting markets with regard to the question of which party is going to win the most seats at the next general election? Now, listen, the calculus is not such that delivers an overall majority. Things are still very complex, and I'm increasingly having to remind myself that we're still years out from a general election. I think there were probably some members of the cabinet who would do well to remind themselves that we're still years out from a general election. But the reason I began the programme this morning by asking you who writes the national story was because it seems to me that if it was being written fairly or honestly, you would know that. You would know that you live in a country where arguably the most reliable gauge of where public opinion lies has currently got the Labour Party at the forefront of the race to win the most seats at the next general election. That's nuts, right? Is it nuts that you didn't know that, or that it is not being more widely reported, or is it just nuts that it's happening? Because that's a question you can only answer through the lens of reflecting upon who writes our national story. It's so completely at odds with the prevailing winds on most media, whether social or legacy. And today is a terrible day, another terrible day for the government. They abandoned a High Court action to postpone, or rather to allow councils to postpone elections on the, outwardly very reasonable grounds that by the time next year comes around, many of the councils to which elections are being held will no longer exist in the form that they would be voted for. But of course, politics isn't about reason or rationality or proper explanations. Politics is about moods and movements. And so portraying Keir Starmer as wanting to abandon elections because he was worried about losing them, when in fact it was councils who wanted to postpone them because they were cognizant of the fact that they wouldn't exist in their current form in a year or two's time, they should have seen that coming from 100 miles away. Once again, bad politics. And also, as I think with the Palestine action ban, decent lawyers, and they have many decent lawyers, would almost certainly have told them, I think, ironically, and again, something else you probably haven't reflected upon yet in the news, as you hear people celebrating or bemoaning, or possibly in a very dull fashion, as I've just done, explaining the story about council election postponements. You probably haven't heard anybody thanking the Lord for the European Convention on Human Rights, under whose auspices, I think, and I've taken advice on this, the fact that they were set to lose in the High Court almost certainly depended. So you have Farage doing a lap of honour over this without mentioning two things. Number one, the bravest man he's ever met continues to lie egregiously on an intergalactic, spectacular scale about the results of the US presidential election in 2020. The bravest man Nigel Farage has ever met despises democracy and lies about it daily. And the mooted or the imminent loss in the High Court of the attempts to postpone the elections is almost certainly, but not certainly, so, don't stick this one on the ledger, but almost certainly down to advice taken that would have encompassed the European Convention on Human Rights, which, of course, is a supranational institution that protects populations from governments that are in danger of or accused of eroding democracy. Two more things that you won't hear mentioned in the coverage, much of the coverage of this story today. It's also a very bad week for the Labour Party because of the investigation that Keir Starmer has announced into reports that a think tank called Labour Together had been investigating in an entirely inappropriate fashion journalists who work for Rupert Murdoch. But again, how would you feel if it turned out someone had hacked Rupert Murdoch's phone? Would you feel the same way that you did when you found out that they'd hacked Millie Dowler's? So again, who writes the national story? I don't know. Well, I do know. But it seems to me to be more important this week than ever before because I do this for a living. And I can't believe what Ladbrokes reported yesterday and what YouGov reports today. YouGov has the reform vote plummeting or falling further than it has in about over a year, and the Labour Party holding steady just ahead of the Tories. So you've got YouGov putting Labour on 19, the Tories on 18, and Reform down from 26 to 23. And you've got Ladbrokes saying that the Labour government, the Labour Party, is currently the party most likely to win the most seats at the next general election. And that, I think you'll agree with me, whatever your politics are, and unless, of course, you're too busy on Facebook complaining about measles vaccinations and you think it's all part of the deep state conspiracy and that none of these figures can be trusted at all. In fact, the only figures that can ever be trusted are the ones that deliver the results that you like. A bit like Donald Trump claiming that the electoral system in America was completely bent when he lost and having no complaints about exactly the same system when he won. A bit like, I suppose, Nigel Farage complaining about democracy being under threat in this country while describing a man who was probably the biggest liar in living memory with regards to democracy, the bravest man he's ever met. So I do this for a living, and I can't quite square this circle. It's not just the way that things are reported, it's the things that have actually happened. The Peter Mandelson scandal is huge. And albeit that there's epic unfairness in play because sundry European figures, both commercial and political, are seeing their careers end in ignominy when being very good friends with Jeffrey Epstein, with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, seems to provide you with actual career boosts in Donald Trump's regime. In fact, later in the programme, we'll be looking at what Nigel Farage's close friend Steve Bannon has had to do with Jeffrey Epstein and remind ourselves of what Farage had to say about Steve Bannon, who stayed very close friends with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein long after he'd been convicted, and while apparently or allegedly or reportedly colluding with Nigel Farage to interfere with British democracy. Did you hear that last bit correctly? Yeah, Epstein's mate, the paedophile's mate, thanked publicly by Farage for all the help that he provided them with during Brexit, long after Epstein, the paedophile, had actually been convicted of crimes. Oh, and what was he thanking him for? Helping to interfere in British democracy. So who writes the national story? Because you probably didn't know that either. Did you know that? Did you know about the Ladbrokes? Did you know about the bookies? Did you know about the polling? Did you know about Bannon, Epstein and Farage? 3 points of a hideous triangle? Did you know about any of this? I don't know. But I do this for a living, and I gave my head the mother of all wobbles this morning because I couldn't quite make sense of it. By rights, if the people that write the national story were reflecting or reporting on the broader picture, by rights, I think Labour would be in single figures, wouldn't they? They certainly wouldn't be the favourites to win the most seats at the next general election. So let me make one thing absolutely clear. This, and I took my medicine last week or the week before from plenty of people who would probably agree with me about most things, but who felt that I was part of some media conspiracy or scam to undermine Keir Starmer. You have to remember that people... I rely on people who talk to politicians all the time or every day. And And they were adamant and quite correct to say that Keir Starmer was in serious trouble. The tanks were being parked on lawns, manoeuvres were underway, attempts to remove him were gathering pace, and then, for reasons that still aren't entirely clear, it all went away. So reporting accurately on the jeopardy in which he found himself was not an act of dishonesty or an act of client journalism or whatever you want to call it. It was a reflection of how serious the situation was. And for reasons I don't fully understand, it becomes, or it feels, less serious today. He seems to be in less serious trouble today, despite two more big stories, in terms of his own party getting ready to defenestrate him. Two more big stories. The Labour Together scandal, which I think is scandalous, although, of course, Keir Starmer has ordered an inquiry by the Cabinet Office immediately, whereas Boris Johnson would have described it as an inverted pyramid of piffle and lied about it until the police were knocking on his door, as he did on other matters. But again, I don't know how important that is, but it's relevant to who writes the national story. He should, by rights, be going through another day, another week of somewhat premature epitaphs. They should be writing the obituaries for Keir Starmer's premiership. And they're not. They are reported, or rather, we are aware of surprisingly good polling for the party and favourite status for now, the bookies. Two things that seem to me to be so completely at odds with the national story. The national story, that I'm a little bit confused. And I'm asking you this question from a place of confusion and mischief as well. Let me be completely honest with you. I think it's a hilarious question to ask in many ways, but it's also a profoundly serious one, because it makes no sense if you rely upon traditional outlets, upon social media, upon legacy media, upon some newspapers or broadcasters. It makes absolutely no sense. In fact, the kind of people that routinely get bookmakers on to their programmes or into their pages to reflect upon what the markets possibly mean. There'll be none of that going on today, because the markets tell us that the Labour Party is currently favourite to win the most seats at the next general election. And that is, absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? And the question I've got for you is why? Why? In fact, the question I've got for you is, why are Labour doing so well? And that's what I mean by the curious mixture of seriousness and mischief. Because by all accounts, they're not doing well. But according to the latest polling and according to the bookmakers' reports yesterday, they are doing a million times better than even I, as someone who does this for a living, would have attested. In fact, I didn't believe what I was seeing, both yesterday and today. So, listen, don't waste tuppence ringing me to tell me that you don't believe it either, because I've checked, that's my job. These are the facts, these are the figures. They could change. They could have changed by the end of the programme. In fact, there's probably some little Farage fans out there now putting their pension on reform to win the next election, and they'll move the market. Did I tell you what happened when I put 50 quid on Kidderminster Harriers to win the FA Trophy? It's such a tiny market and such a big bet for that market that it went from 8-1 to 5-1 the minute I pressed send. That's the way the markets work. So they reflect what people are spending money on more than they respect other kind of factors. That's the difference between opinion polling and bookmakers. But the bookies, the prices normally follow the polling. We are living in a country where the current government is led by one of the least popular prime ministers in history. That's, again, a matter of fact. But popularity is a strange thing to measure anyway. Who would you rather drove your children home from a party, Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson? Okay, exactly. Who would you rather go for a pint with, Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson? You see, what is popularity? He is, however, according to approval ratings, the least popular prime minister in a month of Sundays, and yet the numbers are positive. The numbers are good. Against the backdrop of what we have been talking about and what has been going on, the numbers are surprisingly good. And listen, the bit that comes from confusion is I don't understand why, and I'd like you to tell me what's going on. 0345 60 973. And the second part of the question is, pretty simply, why are they doing so well? That's the mischief bit, because even for me, it's a crazy question to ask. So would it be easier, would it be less mischievous if I said, why is it not going worse? Why is it not going worse? Or why is it going well? 0345 6060 973. Two more terrible stories. Don't make no mistake. The council postponement, terrible politics, should never have put themselves in the position where they could take this spanking. Daily Telegraph pretending that it's all part of some cowardly master plan to avoid elections, when in fact it was an opportunity to allow councils to postpone them until they no longer existed. So instead you're going to be electing people to positions that won't exist by this time next year. And the Labour Together story, although it's a little bit hard for non-Westminster heads to get their noggins around, it involves secret funding of think tanks, and it involves inappropriate investigations of journalists. So these are bad stories, and they are this week fast upon the Mandelson stories, fast upon the other U-turns, and yet the picture is surprisingly rosy, and I genuinely don't know why. And it makes me think that when you were attacking me a couple of weeks ago for being part of some media conspiracy to defenestrate Keir Starmer, I wasn't wrong about that, because the tanks were being parked on his lawn, but I think I must have missed something that explained the level of enthusiasm for him and his government, and the anger at what you saw being done to him. So I think I missed that. I came off air thinking I've seemed today to have upset people that I normally don't want to upset. And you upset me, because if you accuse me of lying when I'm not lying, and I'm never lying, if you accuse me of lying when I'm not lying, it's quite hurtful. It's quite personal. If you're a normal, sensible, decent person, if you're a racist nut job, then it's a vote of confidence and a badge of honour for you to insult me or call me a liar. But if you think I'd lie about that, then you really haven't been paying attention. But I do think I must have missed something. And it's coming into focus with these new numbers from both the bookmakers and the opinion polling. And I don't know what it is. So why do you think things are going considerably better for the Labour government than, I'm going to say, than they should be, or than you might have expected them to be?